He stood on the corner, hands trembling as the security guard's boot caught his thin blanket and sent it spiraling into the gutter, leaving him bare against the biting wind. Passers-by whispered curses, their eyes sliding over his hollow cheeks as if he were less than human. His uniform, once gleaming with medals and honor, hung in tatters at a pawnshop window, traded for the price of one meager meal. Every shouted order he obeyed on distant battlefields now echoed back as contempt. "Move along, vagrant. Get out of here, bum." Tonight, the world remembered only the shape of his despair, and not the name he fought so hard to protect. Before diving into this gripping tale, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to catch more inspiring stories like this one. A pale light seeped through the threadbare curtains of the rented room, painting the chipped walls in soft shades of dawn. The air was cold and smelled faintly of stale coffee and old paper. Outside, the city stirred. Distant horns, the clatter of bus wheels on cracked pavement, and the low hum of morning pedestrians filling gaps between streetlights still blinking off. Somewhere a dog barked, ragged and hopeful. Somewhere a church bell tolled, hesitant against the drum of urban life. In that hush between night's retreat and day's reclaiming, Michael Carter lay on a thin mattress, his breath shallow, body curled, as if to shield himself from more than just the cold. He was tall once, 6'2", broad-shouldered, the kind of man you remembered in a crowded room. Now his frame seemed smaller, clothes hanging loosely, fists clenched around the hem of a frayed blanket. His head turned toward the window, where a single moth battered itself against the glass. He watched its futile dance, feeling a kinship, trapped, desperate for light, willing to hurt itself to reach something just beyond its grasp. Michael's voice, when he spoke, came as a soft murmur. His mind swirled with memories he could not keep at bay. The faces of friends he lost in distant deserts, the metallic taste of fear before a thunderous explosion, and the echo of orders barked in foreign tongues. But most of all, he remembered home, laughter around a kitchen table, his mother's gentle hum while cooking, the feel of his daughter's small hand in his. That memory was both balm and wound, proof of what he had and what he had lost. A sudden knock at the door jolted him from reverie. His heart thundered, not in fear of violence, but in the old rhythm of war, alert, ready. He did not trust friendly knocks. He sat up, muscles coiled, senses sharpened. The knock came again, firmer this time, accompanied by a low voice. "Mr. Carter? It's Judge Reynolds. Please open up." Michael's breath caught. His fingers trembled as he rose and unlocked the door. There stood Judge Eleanor Reynolds, her robes folded neatly over her arm, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was the last person he expected here in this rundown boarding house 2 miles from the courthouse. Her eyes softened when she met him, though surprise flickered behind them. She slipped past him into the room. "I know this is not comfortable," she began quietly, shutting the door against the world's noise. "But we need go. Today is your trial." Michael swallowed. Trial. The word tasted cruel, as if mocking his long journey from uniformed respect to this forgotten corner of the city. For months he had drifted, from shelter to shelter, from handouts to empty applause of gratitude. His service medals had been pawned long ago just to pay for a night's bed. His name, once spoken with honor, had become a whisper in alleys. He straightened, reclaiming a fragment of pride. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was low but steady. He folded the blanket over his arm without letting it slacken completely. It felt like part of him now. In the mirror by the door, he caught sight of hollow cheeks and shadowed eyes. But beneath the weariness, something remained. The soldier's spine, still straight, still unwilling to bow completely. Outside, the dawn had brightened into a pale blue sky. Judge Reynolds led him down creaking stairs, past peeling wallpaper and faded photographs of places he once dreamed of seeing. On the street, a bus pulled up, passengers shuffled on and off, their own lives spinning in different orbits. No one looked at Michael. They saw another drifter, another nameless face. He felt both invisible and exposed, as if everyone could see the uniform he once wore, even when the cloth was gone. She guided him onto the bus, and they rode in silence. The city rolled by, shuttered shops, graffiti-strewn walls, a playground with rusted swings swinging in a wind that was more memory than movement. Michael studied his reflection in the window. He wondered if this was the moment when judgment would break him, or if somehow he might still stand tall. At the courthouse entrance, they parted ways. The grand steps loomed, cold limestone worn smooth by 1,000 footsteps. Fluted columns rose to meet a pediment carved with the scales of justice. Judge Reynolds offered a small, encouraging nod before slipping inside. Michael stood for a moment, hand resting on the rail, feeling the weight of every accusation, every whisper of shame pressing down. Inside, the foyer was bright and bustling. Lawyers in crisp suits consulted thick files. Reporters tapped at laptops under the glare of overhead lights. Families waited in rows of wooden benches, some hugging children, others staring blankly at the floor. Michael stepped forward, each footfall echoing in his ears. He found his assigned seat at a long wooden table. Opposite him sat 2 young attorneys. They glanced at his paperwork, photographs of him on the streets, his service record, the charges of trespassing, loitering, resisting arrest. They looked at him the way soldiers might measure a recruit, potential risk value. Through the courtroom doors came a soft murmur. Judge Reynolds entered, her robes whispering against the floor. All heads turned, the room stilled. Michael rose. Every emotion swirled inside him. Dread, anger, hope. He wondered if anyone would recognize him now as an honored veteran. He wondered if his name still carried power. "Mr. Carter," Judge Reynolds said, her voice firm but gentle, "we are here today to hear the case of the state versus Michael Carter." A clerk called the roll. Michael answered, his clear baritone carrying in hush. Then came the moment that would change everything. The clerk misread his middle name from the files and paused. "Michael David Carter," she corrected herself, glancing at Judge Reynolds. "Michael David Carter." At that utterance, a hush rippled across the courtroom. Michael froze, eyes narrowing. He did not know that name was his. David was not on his records. His name was simply Michael Carter. And yet, somehow, the addition resonated deep in the hearts of everyone present. The judge's stern mask flickered. The lawyers came to attention, surprise crossing their faces. Even the jurors shifted in their seats, as if recalling some buried truth. Michael's own pulse thundered. David, he felt it, an echo of the boy he once was, before war, before hardship. He could almost smell his mother's perfume and hear her lullaby. And then he realized David was the name he'd been baptized with, the name on the church records his mother clutched when she thought he would be lost forever overseas. He remembered kneeling at an altar, pink candles burning, hands clasped in hope. He stood straighter. The room's hush pressed in, but he felt something change within him, a rising tide of recognition, of reclamation. He was not just a homeless veteran, he was Michael David Carter, a name that carried more weight than any pawned medal, a name that belonged to a son, a brother, a man who had given everything and still had something worth fighting for. Judge Reynolds cleared her throat. "We will proceed under the correct name," she said softly but with authority. "Michael David Carter." As the clerk nodded and adjusted the record, Michael closed his eyes for just a moment and breathed deeply. The walls of the courtroom seemed brighter, the faces looking at him with new attention. He felt roots unfurling from his feet, grounding him. He was not invisible here. He was not a statistic or a sad story. He was a man with a name, and that name mattered. The bailiff called the first witness, and the trial began in earnest. But in that pregnant silence before the opening statement, Michael felt something powerful awaken. Hope laced with resolve, a fierce determination that whatever came next, he would stand tall as Michael David Carter and claim his place in a world that had all but forgotten him. And somewhere, beyond the carved oak doors and marble floors, the city carried on, unaware of the quiet quake that had begun within one man's heart. The courtroom settled into an uneasy stillness as the bailiff announced a brief recess. Michael David Carter remained seated, His pulse had barely slowed from the opening statements, each word a hammer striking his pride. When the bailiff's voice cut through the tension, the jury filed out first, their faces neutral masks. The prosecution team gathered by the lectern, exchanging hushed murmurs. Judge Eleanor Reynolds leaned back, watching Michael with those clear gray eyes that had once offered solace, now unreadable. He swallowed and rose to stretch muscles stiff from sitting too long. Every fiber of his body still held the soldier's alertness. His heart felt lodged in his throat. At the edge of the defense table, Sarah Mitchell, his court-appointed attorney, leaned close. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose chignon, and her green eyes gleamed with determination. "Mr. Carter," she said softly, "this recess is the perfect time to get some air. Maybe clear your head." He nodded slowly. "Thank you, Ms. Mitchell." His voice faltered. He had almost called her Sarah, but discipline won out. "I'll follow your lead." They stepped into the hallway, where the bright lights burned without mercy. Michael inhaled, trying to swallow the metallic taste of anxiety that had clung to him since dawn. Reporters clustered at the end of the corridor, cameras slung over shoulders, microphones poised. He waited until they looked away, then followed Sarah through a side door into a narrow alcove. She closed the door behind them and pulled out a manila envelope from her briefcase. "I got this minutes ago," she said, handing it to him. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I thought you should see it." Michael's name was scrawled on the envelope in bold black marker. He slid a thumb under the flap and withdrew a single sheet of paper, a photograph faded at the edges. In it, he stood beside a cluster of uniformed men in what looked like a warehouse lit by flickering fluorescence. He was unmistakable, though the picture was grainy, the lean jawline, the haunted eyes. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform. He wore the same threadbare jacket he now wore under his overcoat. He looked up at Sarah. "I don't recognize this place." She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Neither do I. It wasn't mentioned in discovery. The prosecution never disclosed it. They're introducing it next, saying it ties you to a violent altercation that night. They allege you were trespassing on private property, vandalizing, resisting arrest." Michael's heart lurched. "It's not me," he whispered. "I wasn't there." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I've checked every record, every report. No one else matches you. They're saying this is definitive." He stared at the photograph as if willing it to dissolve. The warehouse in the background was unfamiliar, corrugated metal walls, a single open door that glowed like an eye. But the man in front of it, that was him. His coat, the same scars, the same faded stripes. His breath caught, guilt and fear tangled. He could feel the cold sweat on his palms. A distant roar of the courtroom door opening jolted them. Sarah folded the photograph and stuffed it back into the envelope. "We'll object," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "But I need to know everything. Where were you that night? Who might want to set you up?" He shook his head, trying to clear the fog. "I was in the shelter off Fifth. I slept there. I have witnesses." He closed his eyes, picturing the bunk room. Its thin mattresses, the harsh fluorescent lights, the steady snore of other men. "I swear it." Sarah offered a tight smile. "Then we'll call them." "But Michael," she hesitated. "Be ready. Once that photograph goes in, the jury will see it before any explanation." His stomach clenched. Already in his mind, he could see jurors whispering, leaning toward one another. Look at the man in tatters, vandalizing property. He imagined headlines tomorrow. Homeless veteran accused of violence. He scrubbed a hand across his stubbled chin. A soft knock sounded on the door. A tall man in a gray suit slipped inside. Michael only caught the tilt of his head before the man spoke in low tones to Sarah, nodding toward him. Sarah turned, her expression guarded. "Detective Benson," she said, voice cool. Detective Carla Benson stepped into the alcove. She wore a crisp uniform, even her badge gleamed. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight ponytail. Michael remembered that name. She'd been on a federal task force during his deployment. They'd crossed paths, though they'd never met here. Now her blue eyes judged him. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending a hand. "May I?" He noticed how her grip was firm but not warm. He nodded, trying to mask the twitch of recognition her gaze sparked. "Detective." She looked at Sarah. "We need to discuss the chain of custody on that photograph." Sarah closed her briefcase with a muted click. "Of course. Let's talk in the conference room." Before Michael could protest, they were ushered down the hall. His heart thundered so loudly he could hardly follow their words. Sarah's whispered tone was urgent. "Carla thinks the envelope was tampered with. She says there's no record of upload to the case file." Detective Benson glanced at Michael, her expression inscrutable. "I want to ensure Mr. Carter's rights are protected, but this photograph has raised questions in our office. Some think it was planted." Michael's breath caught. "Planted?" His gaze darted from Sarah to the detective. "Who would do that?" Benson's eyes narrowed. "Someone who wants you to lose." A cold dread settled in Michael's chest. Outside, the press wouldn't care about planted evidence. They'd print the image without context. He recalled the faces of men he'd trusted, a commanding officer who'd vanished amid scandal, a fellow veteran who'd turned cynic. Could one of them betray him now, reaching out with a malicious hand from the past? They entered a small conference room. The detective placed the photograph on the table under a lamp. Sarah pulled out folders. Michael stood by the window, arms crossed. Benson cleared her throat. "I can vouch for everything I've done in the chain of command. I reported the find to my sergeant, who forwarded it to the DA. But the file itself, its metadata, was accessible to several people." Sarah frowned. "So you can't say when it was added?" "Not exactly. It could have been days ago or minutes," Benson replied. She turned to Michael. "You said you slept at the shelter. Do you have the name of someone who can confirm that?" He sank onto a wooden chair. "Yes, Tommy Lawrence. He was in the bunk next to me." Sarah scribbled notes. "We'll bring him in for testimony. But here's the bigger concern." She looked up, eyes locked on Michael. "The prosecution might already know you're going to call him. If they're desperate, they'll find a way to discredit both you and your witness." Michael rubbed his temples. The world felt grainy at the edges. Every anchor he'd found, his name, his judge's sympathy, now seemed shaky. Who was guiding this trial? Was it personal? Was someone watching for his weakest moment? Detective Benson closed her notebook. "I'm going to look deeper into the source of this photograph. But right now, you need to prepare for the worst in court. I'll update you." She walked out, leaving Sarah and Michael alone. Sarah gathered her papers. "We need to build an alternative narrative for the jury. Show them who you are beyond the photo." He nodded, voice hoarse. "I want them to see the truth." "But why me? Why now?" She met his gaze softly. "I don't know. But whoever it is, they're afraid of what your name can do." Michael's mind raced back to that moment when the clerk first said, "Michael David Carter," and the courtroom fell silent. That name, once stripped of his medals, now seemed the only thing keeping him tethered to dignity. Whoever was targeting him knew its power. They left the conference room and returned to the main hallway. The jury was filing back in. Reporter flashes winked down the corridor. Michael squared his shoulders, lifted his chin. Fear still pulsed through him. But beneath it, a firmer resolve. He would fight this planted lie. As they re-entered the courtroom, Sarah whispered, "Remember who you are, Michael David Carter. The world may try to twist your story, but you hold your truth." He took his seat beside her, chest tight, eyes on the defense table, as the bailiff called, "All rise for the jury." And in that electric moment, Michael felt the axis of his life shift. The photograph was meant to undo him, but instead it awakened something fiercer, the will to expose the hidden hand that sought his ruin. Whatever lay ahead, the game had changed, and he would no longer be its unwitting pawn. Michael sat in the back of the cramped conference room beside Sarah Mitchell, watching her fingers dance over the legal pads. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp angles across her determined face. He thought of her not just as his lawyer, but as the tether that kept him from drifting too far into fear. She had defended him with a fierceness he'd never expected from someone hired by the court. Yet sometimes in her focused gaze, he sensed a flicker of something else, a burden she carried quietly, as if his case meant more to her than mere duty. "Michael," she said softly, pausing, "tell me about your time in the service. We need context, something the jury can latch onto." He leaned back, hands folded in his lap. "I enlisted right after high school. Grew up on stories my father told. He was in Vietnam." He pictured his father's wide smile, the way his eyes would crinkle when he spoke of honor. "I wanted to do something bigger than myself. I joined the infantry. Spent 4 years overseas." Sarah nodded, jotting notes. "What kept you going in those moments of pure fear?" He closed his eyes, transporting himself to desert dust and the echo of mortars. "Camouflage, routine, and the men beside me. We looked out for each other. We shared jokes at dawn when we shouldn't have laughed. I remember Corporal Reyes always humming old Motown records through his radio." He smiled faintly. "We promised each other we'd see home again. I guess I forgot what home looked like." In the corner, Detective Benson watched through the window door, clipboard in hand. Michael felt her gaze prick his skin. He still wasn't sure whether she was an ally or someone who quietly doubted him. He forced his attention back to Sarah. "We'll use that," she said, leaning forward. "Humanize you. Show the jury you're more than a photograph." Now she paused, eyes intent. "Tell me about Tommy Lawrence, your witness." His shoulders tightened. Tommy was the only friend he'd made in months. A wiry man with a broken leg from a car accident, his limp visible even beneath loose trousers. Shared meals, whispered confessions in the bunk room. "Tommy's honest. He's got nothing to gain. He and I saved each other's spots in line at the shelter." "She seems trustworthy," Sarah said, nodding toward the door. "Detective Benson." Michael frowned. "Is she on board?" Sarah hesitated. She thinks the photo was planted, but until she proves it, her superiors won't interfere. She's playing both sides. He felt a surge of unease. "If she's torn." "She'll help where she can," Sarah said, "but we have to assume the DA will paint you as dangerous." The conference room door squeaked, and Detective Benson stepped in. "We have an update," she said, voice measured. "I traced the photograph's origin to a server in the DA's office. It wasn't planted by an outsider. It was generated internally." Michael's breath hitched. "You mean someone inside the prosecution team uploaded it?" Benson's eyes flicked to Sarah. "Yes, someone with enough clearance to modify case files." Sarah pressed her lips together, brow furrowed. "That narrows it down." Michael's heart pounded. "Why? Who would do that?" Benson's gaze met his. "I don't know, but I'm investigating it as an obstruction of justice. If we uncover who, it could upend the entire case." Michael exhaled, relief and dread mingling. "Thank you." She inclined her head. "Keep your faith in the process. I'll be in court." She left without another word. Silence settled. Michael looked at Sarah. "I'm grateful, but the betrayal runs deeper than I thought." Sarah leaned back. "This case isn't just about you. It's about who can manipulate power. Someone is afraid of what your name can do." He stared at the table. "My name, Michael David Carter," echoed through that courtroom. "But power, what power do I have?" Sarah's voice softened. "Your story speaks to something bigger. A veteran, homeless, and forgotten, up against the system. If people see that, it can't be ignored." He nodded slowly. "Then let's make them see." Later that afternoon, the courtroom felt oppressive. Michael sat beside Sarah, glancing at the gallery where a few curious onlookers lingered. Tommy Lawrence would testify soon. Michael's stomach churned at the thought of a stranger recounting his whereabouts, of the jury judging his every word. He recalled Sarah's advice: "Speak honestly. Let them hear your voice." The bailiff called Tommy forward. He hobbled up on crutches, his leg brace clicking against the floor. Michael's chest tightened. The man's clear brown eyes held no malice, only cautious sympathy. As Tommy settled into the witness stand, the attorney for the prosecution stepped forward. A sharply dressed woman named Claire Donovan, voice smooth as glass. "Mr. Lawrence," she began, You testified in your declaration that you saw Mr. Carter at the shelter on the night in question. Is that correct? Tommy nodded. Yes, ma'am. Can you describe his appearance? Same jacket he's wearing now. He folded his arms, voice steady. He came in around midnight. Stayed until morning. Donovan fixed her gaze on Michael. You're aware that Mr. Carter's jacket matches the one in the photograph on private property, correct? Tommy's eyes flickered. I saw that, but it's not proof he wasn't at the shelter. A murmur rose in the courtroom. Michael felt a spike of panic, then Sarah's hand on his arm steadied him. He watched Tommy, who took a breath. There's a roll call at the shelter. Officers record arrivals. I can bring that record names, times. Sarah quietly whispered, Good. Donovan shot a glance at the DA, seated behind her. The DA shook his head slightly. Donovan snapped the file shut. No further questions. Sarah rose. Her voice rang clear. Mr. Lawrence, how long have you known Mr. Carter? Since January. And in all that time, have you ever seen him act violently or out of control? Tommy's jaw set. Never. He's quiet, keeps to himself. Sarah clicked her pen. If he was at the shelter all night, how would he have been out at that warehouse? Tommy hesitated, brows drawn. He couldn't have. Sarah nodded. Thank you. She sat. Michael let out a breath. As the jury filed out again, Michael looked at Tommy. Thank you, he mouthed. Tommy nodded, eyes curtained with fatigue. Outside the courtroom, the late afternoon sun slanted through high windows, dust motes drifting like tiny stars. Detective Benson waited by the entrance, arms crossed. Michael approached, each step echoing louder than before. You did well, she said, voice low. He studied her. Thanks to Tommy. She gave a brief nod. Keep your guard up. This isn't over. He inclined his head. I know. She lingered a moment, then turned away. Michael wondered what she would uncover next, or if her investigation would stall under office politics. Sarah joined him outside, briefcase in hand. We'll admit the shelter records tomorrow. That should solidify your alibi. Michael offered a weary smile. You've done enough already. She shook her head. This is far from over. But you gave them doubt today, and doubt can grow into reasonable uncertainty. He inhaled the stale hallway air. I just want the truth to matter. Sarah looked at him with something like pride. It will. That evening, Michael returned to the shelter under the orange haze of streetlights. Tommy was waiting by a row of lockers. The place was quieter now, most volunteers gone, only a few hushed whispers in the dining hall. Got the records? Michael asked. Tommy held out a folder. Here. Times, names, even signatures. Michael thumbed through the pages. The ink might smudge, but the details were there. Thank you. Tommy nodded. I'll be there in court tomorrow. They stood awkwardly in the corridor. Michael remembered how reaching out had always scared him. Open trust meant open wounds. Look, Tommy said, voice gentle. I know it's scary, letting someone in, but you saved my spot when I was almost out in the storm. Michael closed the folder. I thank you. Tommy glanced down at his crutches. Court's no walk in the park, but I'll be with you. Outside, high in the night sky, a solitary cloud drifted across the moon. Michael thought of Judge Reynolds' calm authority, of Detective Benson's conflicted loyalty, of Sarah's unwavering fight. He felt the threads of their lives weaving around his own. He understood that in this unfolding drama, alliances could shift, truths could be hidden, and betrayals might surface when least expected. He looked at Tommy. I promise I won't forget this. Tommy gave a half smile, then limped away into the shadows. Michael stood alone in the corridor, the sound of distant conversation floating through the walls. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, the weight on his shoulders eased by a fraction. Tomorrow, the prosecution will try again. But tonight, he had allies, Sarah, Tommy, even Detective Benson in her quiet way. And Michael David Carter, veteran witness man, was no longer alone in the struggle. He felt a spark of hope stir, ready to fan into resolve. The trial was far from over, but so was Michael's fight. And as he returned to his cot that night, he glanced down at his watch, nearly 7 o'clock. The courthouse corridors were nearly empty now. Only a lone security guard patrolled, nodding at him as he passed. Michael rose and walked back to the small conference room where Sarah Mitchell had taken up residence, poring over the day's notes. She looked up when he entered, her auburn hair slipping loose from its chignon. "Michael," she said, voice mild. "Good. I was worried you wouldn't come back." He hesitated in the doorway. There was something in her tone, an edge he hadn't heard before. "Sarah, do you have a minute?" She gestured to the chair opposite her. "Of course." She closed the notebook she'd been writing in, and for a moment Michael thought she looked tired, exhausted even. He sat down, folded his hands. I want to thank you," he began, voice quiet. "Today went well. Tommy's testimony, the shelter records, it felt like we were gaining ground." Sarah nodded, but her gaze drifted to the half-open door. "Yes," she said, "we did okay." She frowned and ran a hand through her hair. "Actually, there's something else. I've been doing some digging on my end." Michael's chest tightened. "Digging?" She swallowed. "I've been reviewing the metadata on that photograph you saw, the one from the warehouse." She paused as though weighing every word. It didn't just come from inside the DA's office. He leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Sarah picked up a folder from the table and slid it toward him. There was an anonymous VPN used to upload it. It pinged through several nodes, but the final one traced back, oddly, to my home network. The folder slid to the floor as Michael's eyes widened. "Your network?" "Sarah." She pressed a palm to her lips. Her eyes glistened with something he'd never seen there before. Guilt, shame, or fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen." "Explain," he said, voice taut. Sarah ran her fingers over the wood of the table. "Last week, I received a call. A woman's voice. She said she was worried about me, worried about my career, threatened me with consequences if I didn't cooperate. She said she had ways to make my life impossible." She closed her eyes. I thought she was bluffing. Michael stared at her. "Who was she?" Sarah opened her eyes and shook her head. "I never got her name. She gave me an email address and told me to upload any damaging material I had on you. She said she wanted to see you lose and that she'd make sure the DA's office got it." Michael felt bile rise in his throat. "Why would you do that? You said you believed in me." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. "I do. I still do." She closed her fists. "I thought I could control it. I wanted to send them the original service records, show them your medals, your honorable discharge, make them think I was building a stronger defense. But the file got corrupted. The only photo I could salvage was that grainy warehouse image." He stood, anger and betrayal crashing through him. "You used my own attorney-client portal to plant evidence against me?" Sarah stood as well, reaching out. "Michael, please." He recoiled. "Don't call me Michael. Not now." He paced, every footstep echoing. "You uploaded it from your own home? You gave them my photograph." Her voice cracked. "I wanted to help. I got scared when they said they'd ruin my license, my reputation. I was cornered." He slammed a fist against the wall. "You were cornered? I am cornered. You betrayed me when I trusted you most." Sarah's shoulders shook. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought I was doing what was best. If I blocked the DA from knowing your alibi, they'd have to rely on the photo." "You wanted me to lose?" he spat. She shook her head, tears streaming. "No, I wanted to scare them into accepting the shelter records. I thought I could bluff them." Michael's vision blurred with rage and grief. "You gambled with my life and lost." Sarah sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Michael's chest tightened. He fought back tears of his own. "I thought you were my anchor," he said softly. "My fight in this courtroom." When she lifted her head, her eyes were red. "I still am," she whispered. "I'll fix this. I'll come clean to the judge tomorrow." He shook his head. "Too late. You've already poisoned the jury's well." He glanced at the door as footsteps approached. "Get out of here, Sarah." Moments later, she rose, her movements slow and broken. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, before slipping out into the corridor. Michael listened to her footsteps fade, then sank against the table, head in hands. That night, Michael lay awake on his thin cot in the sheltered dormitory. The dim glow of a single bulb cast long shadows on the ceiling. His mind raced, replaying Sarah's confession. He had rejected his last ally. In the silence around him, the weight of betrayal felt suffocating. He thought of Judge Reynolds, the one person who had shown him genuine respect. He wondered what she would do upon hearing that his attorney had deliberately tampered with evidence. The judge might dismiss the case, might even hold Sarah in contempt, but would she believe Michael's side of the story without Sarah's support? Michael doubted it. By midnight, he rose and pulled on his coat. He left the shelter quietly, the night air sharp against his face. The streets were empty, the city's neon signs flickering. He walked toward the courthouse, a sense of urgency propelling him. The case couldn't proceed with such tainted defense. He needed the truth out in the open. The grand entrance was locked, but a side door, the one used by staff, was ajar. Michael slipped through, heart pounding. The hall lights were on, but no one patrolled. He crept toward Sarah's office, where he hoped to find the original emails that would name the anonymous caller. If he could expose whoever blackmailed Sarah, he might clear enough ground to rebuild his defense. Inside her office, papers were scattered, notes, file folders, her laptop left open. Michael closed the door and hurried to the desk. He tapped the keyboard. It needed a password. He stepped back. "Of course," he muttered. "Your trust in me can't stretch to your passwords." He rifled through the drawers until he found a sticky note. "Sarah at 1984. He typed it and the laptop unlocked. He opened the email client. The inbox held dozens of messages, most from court clerks or colleagues. But one folder, urgent, was new. He clicked it. Inside were 3 emails, each from a different anonymous address, all warning Sarah to upload the photograph or face destruction of her career. One subject line read, "Your choice, protect your name or lose everything." Michael opened it, scrolling through threats designed to prey on every fear an attorney might have. Malpractice suits, bar investigations, false allegations of misconduct. The signature line was a single pseudonym, Archangel. Michael's pulse quickened. Archangel, who could that be? He thought back to the names he'd heard. Claire Donovan, the slick prosecutor, Oliver Grant, the DA, perhaps someone within that team. Archangel sounded like a username, a hacker. He might not learn a real identity tonight, but he had proof that the photograph was blackmail, not legitimate evidence. He downloaded the emails onto a USB drive and snapped his laptop shut. His hands trembled as he turned to leave, only to see Detective Benson standing in the doorway, gun holstered at her side. "Detective Benson," he whispered. Why are you here?" Her eyes were solemn. "I got your message. You used the courtroom intercom." Michael closed his eyes. He'd panicked and hit the alarm button when he saw Sarah leave. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I couldn't wait." She stepped forward. "You did what you had to do, but we need to move fast." She held up a cell phone. "I recorded Sarah's confession tonight, and I have an investigator pulling logs to trace Archangel's IP." He closed his fist around the USB drive. "Then we can expose the blackmail." Hope, fragile but real, seeped back into his chest. She nodded. "Tomorrow at the pretrial hearing, we'll present this to Judge Reynolds. It'll blow the whole thing wide open." Michael exhaled, tension easing. "And Sarah?" "She'll testify under immunity if she cooperates fully," Benson said. "But the DA's office will be in chaos." He met her gaze. "Thank you for believing me." Her lips tightened. "You deserve the truth to win." Dawn found Michael back in his chair at the defense table. Sarah sat beside him, pale and shivering in her robe. She'd spent the night in Judge Reynolds' chambers under a promise of protection. Across the aisle, Claire Donovan and DA Oliver Grant looked on with narrowed eyes. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Reynolds entered, stopped at the bench, and surveyed the room. Her gray eyes flicked to Michael, then to Sarah, then back to the prosecution table. No further testimony will be admitted until we resolve the issue of evidence tampering, she said. Her voice brooked no argument. Mr. Carter, your counsel, Ms. Mitchell, has confessed to uploading unverified evidence. This court cannot proceed until we determine the extent and origin of that material. Claire, Donovan rose. Your Honor, if I may. Judge Reynolds held up her hand. Not yet. She turned to Michael. Mr. Carter, do you wish to proceed with these matters? Michael swallowed and rose. Yes, Your Honor. The evidence was planted under blackmail. We have logs and recordings proving it wasn't genuine. I request that the photograph and any derived claims be stricken from the record. Judge Reynolds nodded. Proceed. Detective Benson stepped forward, laid out the printed emails, the recording, and the digital logs. The DA stammered, caught off guard. By the time Michael sat again, the entire courtroom buzzed with the implications. His betrayal by Sarah had nearly shattered him, but exposing the true villain behind Archangel and the DA's complicity shifted the entire case. The photograph that had threatened to send him to prison would now become the prosecution's own burden of shame. Michael sank into his chair, chest heavy but determined. The betrayal had cut deep, but from its wound came clarity. He would fight not only for his name, but for the principle that truth could prevail even in a system rigged by fear and power. And as the morning sun slanted through the courtroom windows, Michael David Carter felt the first pure spark of hope since this trial began. Proof that in the darkest moments, a single revelation could change everything. Michael stepped into the courtroom that morning feeling the weight of every unresolved choice pressing down on him. The air was thick with anticipation. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, but it did nothing to warm the solemn faces around him. He took his seat beside Sarah Mitchell, who sat with her shoulders squared even as exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. Across the aisle, Claire Donovan and DA Oliver Grant exchanged cold smiles, already plotting their next move. Detective Benson lingered near the back, silent sentinel. When Judge Reynolds entered and called the court to order, Michael's pulse leapt. There would be no easy path forward. The photograph had been struck, the blackmail exposed, but the prosecution was far from conceding. This day would test every reserve of strength and every fragile alliance he'd forged. Claire Donovan rose first. Her polished shoes tapped on the wooden floor as she passed the lectern. Your Honor, if it pleases the court, we would like to recall Mr. Carter's character through expert testimony. Her voice was smooth, certain. We plan to introduce a psychologist, Dr. Emily Strauss, who examined Mr. Carter last week. Michael's stomach tightened. He remembered Strauss from his pre-trial evaluation, how she'd peered into his eyes and asked about nightmares, hypervigilance, and how long since he'd slept uninterrupted. He'd answered as simply as he could, but her report had emphasized possible PTSD with impulsive tendencies. Now, Donovan intended to use those private notes against him. Sarah's hand found him under the table. Her grip was firm. He drew strength from it, but dread churned beneath his ribs. He forced himself to sit straighter. Judge Reynolds nodded. Very well. Call Dr. Strauss. The doors at the back swung open, and a woman in a gray suit entered, a paper folder clutched to her chest. She took the stand, settled her notes, and cleared her throat. Dr. Strauss, Donovan began, please describe your findings regarding Mr. Carter. Strauss adjusted her glasses. Mr. Carter presented symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, recurrent nightmares, hyperarousal, and occasional dissociative episodes under stress. He reported difficulty trusting others and flashes of intense anxiety in enclosed spaces. A hush fell. Michael felt blood rush to his face. He recalled the nights at the shelter, jolting awake, as if under fire, the phantom echoes of gunfire in his ears. He had lived with those shadows for months. Donovan pressed on. Doctor, would you say those symptoms could impair his judgment in high-pressure situations? Strauss hesitated. They could, depending on severity. She glanced at Michael, as if apologizing, which in his case, well, he copes admirably, but some residual effects remain. In the gallery, a few jurors exchanged glances. Michael's heart pounded. Was this all it took to paint him as unstable? He clenched his jaw, determined that his next move would be decisive. When Strauss stepped down, Donovan returned to her seat with a satisfied smile. The prosecutor had planted the seed of doubt. During the mid-morning recess, Michael found Tommy Lawrence waiting outside the jury room. Tommy leaned against the wall, one crutch under his arm and the other dangling. His eyes were rimmed red. "Tommy," Michael said softly, "are you all right?" Tommy swallowed. "Got a call this morning. Someone threatened me. Said if I testified today, I'd regret it." He ran a hand through his hair. "They know I have a family. 2 kids, Mary and little Jacob. They said they'd hurt them if I spoke again." Michael's chest clenched. He remembered Sarah's betrayal, Detective Benson's investigations, but this was a new low. "Did you tell Sarah?" Tommy nodded. She said she'd arrange extra security, but his voice trailed off. Michael placed a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing. We'll protect you. Detective Benson will see to it." He sent a quick look toward the detective, who met his gaze and nodded. Tommy exhaled, tension easing slightly. I'll testify again. For you." Michael braced himself against the wall. "Thank you." Inside, the second half of the trial would bring even fiercer challenges, but he would not let Tommy face this alone. Back in the courtroom, Sarah Mitchell stood before Judge Reynolds. "Your Honor, given Dr. Strauss's testimony, we request a hearing on the admissibility of mental health evidence." Her voice, though weary, was resolute. "Mr. Carter's PTSD is a result of government service. It should not be held against him in the absence of direct relevance to the charges." Judge Reynolds regarded Sarah thoughtfully. "I will hear arguments." "Claire," Donovan objected, citing case law on character evidence. Sarah countered with statutes protecting veterans' medical privacy. Each point Sarah made felt like pulling swords from unseen scabbards, fragile tools in a battle of giants. Yet, for every statute she recited, Michael felt her bravery shine through. When the judge recessed again to deliberate, Michael saw Sarah close her eyes and lean back. She looked exhausted, haunted. After court adjourned for lunch, he caught up to her in the hallway. "Sarah," he said gently, "thank you for fighting." She managed a weak smile. "I couldn't live with myself if I abandoned you, after what I did." Her voice cracked. "But I'm not sure if I can fix this. The DA is pushing hard." He reached for her hand. "Let them push. We'll stand our ground." That afternoon, Detective Benson approached Michael in the courtroom lobby. "I have something for you," she whispered, handing him a small envelope. He opened it to reveal transcripts of intercepted emails, evidence that Claire, Donovan herself, had exchanged messages with the mysterious Archangel account. In one, Donovan praised a well-timed photo submission and promised plenty more where that came from. In another, she threatened Sarah's career if the defense didn't play ball. Michael's jaw went rigid. "This is astounding." Benson put a firm hand on his shoulder. "We'll move to impeach her credibility. But be ready. She'll attack your witness credibility in return." Michael nodded. The life and death stakes of the trial flared anew. This was more than a legal battle, it was a war of power and conscience. As court resumed, Michael felt a tightness in his chest. Every witness, every piece of evidence, now carried the echo of betrayal and intrigue. He could feel the jury's eyes drifting his way, searching for doubt. He realized that beyond winning the case, he had a more personal choice: to embrace the chaos of a system that had nearly crushed him, or to rise above, reclaiming his own narrative and dignity. In the gallery sat his father's old church pastor, Reverend Thomas Whitaker, brought in as a character witness at Michael's request. The man's gentle presence gave Michael courage. Reverend Whitaker's testimony spoke of Michael's kindness, his volunteer work handing out sandwiches, the way he'd prayed for other men at the shelter. The contrast between Dr. Strauss's clinical diagnosis and the Reverend's heartfelt account laid bare a deeper truth. Michael was more than a wounded soldier. When Sarah stood to make her closing statements for the day, her voice rang with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, war changes a man. It scars both body and mind. But we do not punish the wounded for their brokenness. We honor their service, support their healing, and seek justice. Always justice. Michael David Carter came here seeking truth, not. He thought of Sarah's sacrifice, Tommy's courage, Benson's quiet loyalty, and the judge's steady pursuit of fairness. He also thought of Claire Donovan, whose ambition had driven her to betray every norm of justice. Michael closed his eyes and exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Tomorrow would bring final challenges. The DA's maneuver to keep mental health evidence, the sudden appearance of a surprise witness, perhaps even an attempt to discredit the Reverend. He would need every ounce of resolve. He reached under his cot and pulled out a small dog-eared photograph, him and his daughter hugging at her 5th birthday. He traced her smiling face with a fingertip and whispered, "I'll be all right. I'll fight for you, for my name, and for the idea that justice can still be just." The night wrapped around him, tense and uncertain. But within him, a quiet fire burned brighter than ever. He had faced betrayal, intimidation, and his own inner demons. What came next would test him further. Yet, no matter how fierce the storm, Michael David Carter would meet it head-on, because the truth was worth every sacrifice, and the fight for dignity was the only battle he could ever truly lose. Morning light cut through the high courtroom windows in stark columns, dust motes swirling like tiny dancers in its path. Michael David Carter stood behind the defense table, heart thundering in his chest as Judge Reynolds took her seat on the bench. The wooden gavel's first rap echoed like a thunderclap, calling the courtroom to order. Every face, jurors, reporters, lawyers, turned toward the lectern. In that tense silence, Michael felt the weight of every secret, every betrayal, and every hard-won truth bearing down on him. Today, all of it would come to light. Claire Donovan rose first, her heels clicking on the polished floor as she approached the jury box. She held a single sheet of paper, her surprise witness, Daniel Green, a paralegal from the DA's office. Green took the stand with visible reluctance, his fingers twitching as though each question ignited fresh fear. Under direct examination, Donovan painted him as conscientious, just following orders when he supplied the photograph. Then she stepped back, and Sarah Mitchell, though still pale from sleepless nights, seized her chance. "Your Honor," Sarah began, voice steady despite the tremor she suppressed, "I call Detective Carla Benson." The courtroom buzzed as Benson rose, her uniform pristine, badge glinting. Under Sarah's calm questioning, Benson laid out every link: Green's email trail, Donovan's messages with the Archangel account, the blackmail threats, and finally the confirmation that Donovan herself had orchestrated the photograph's appearance. As each revelation surfaced, the air trembled with shock. Faces flushed, whispers rippled through the gallery, and even the judge's stern features softened with disbelief. When Detective Benson concluded, Sarah turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you now know that the prosecution knowingly introduced false evidence to sway your judgment. They attacked my client's name, reputation, and very humanity. This is not justice, it is manipulation." Her words hung in the air, sharp and resonant. Michael felt his chest tighten, realizing that those same jurors who had once doubted him now confronted a betrayal far deeper than any he had endured. Claire Donovan rose to object, lips pressed into a thin line. But Judge Reynolds cut her off with a firm gaze. "Ms. Donovan, your conduct is reprehensible. I will consider appropriate sanctions, but for now, we proceed." Her voice carried the weight of an oak tree grown strong against endless storms. At that moment, the courthouse itself seemed to inhale, preparing for the next wave of truth. Detective Benson nodded to Sarah, then returned to her seat. Sarah whispered to Michael, "This is our moment, finish strong." Michael swallowed and rose. He approached the jury box under a halo of sunlight, each step deliberate and unhurried. The jurors watched him, some with eyes reddened by emotion, others open with dawning respect. He placed both hands on the polished wood railing and took a breath. "I stood here once," he began, voice resonant, broken, nameless, reduced to a photograph and a label. You saw me as a homeless veteran, a potential criminal. But I am Michael David Carter. I served my country. I lost friends. I bore wounds you cannot see. Yet none of that justifies a lie, nor does it strip me of my dignity. He paused, letting the silence carry his words. Today, you've learned how power can corrupt, but you've also seen how truth can prevail when people refuse to keep secrets, when a judge honors fairness, when a detective seeks justice, when a lawyer recovers her courage, and when a man refuses to surrender his name. A hush fell as he returned to his seat. Reverend Thomas Whitaker, called back for a final statement, spoke of redemption and mercy, invoking images of light breaking through storm clouds. His words painted Michael not as a shadow, but as a man stepping into his own brightness. Then Judge Reynolds addressed the courtroom one last time before sending the jury to deliberate. In the hush that followed, the tension was almost unbearable. Michael felt sweat bead on his brow, his hands clasped tightly before him. Sarah paused beside him, offering a reassuring nod. Detective Benson's hand brushed his shoulder in silent solidarity. Even Claire Donovan watched with a pale face, the conviction blown open like a glass lantern. When the jury returned, the bailiff called, "All rise." The gavel fell twice, sharp, decisive. Judge Reynolds peered over her glasses at the foreperson. For a moment, time stretched so thin Michael thought it might snap. Then the fireperson's voice rang clear. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael David Carter, not guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she squeezed Michael's hand. Detective Benson let out a breath she'd held since the trial began. Even Judge Reynolds allowed a small, proud smile. Michael stood, shoulders uncoiled, his heart soaring. He walked past the defense table to where Tommy Lawrence waited near the door. Their eyes met, and Tommy gave a small thumbs up, crutch tapping softly against the wood. Outside, the sun was high and warm, bouncing off the courthouse steps. Reporters swarmed, but Michael stepped forward, Sarah and Benson flanking him like guardians. He lifted his chin and spoke into the nearest microphone. "Today, justice was done not because we wielded power, but because we sought the truth. Every name matters, every person matters. I reclaim mine now, not as a label, but as a testament to resilience and hope." His words echoed beyond that plaza. In the days that followed, donations poured into veteran shelters. Former prosecutors faced internal investigations. Donovan's career lay in ruins, and Green cooperated fully with authorities. Sarah returned to her practice with renewed respect, determined to protect those without a voice. Detective Benson advanced in her department, known now for her courage in exposing corruption. As for Michael, he moved into a small apartment provided by a veterans program. He took a job as a counselor at the very shelter where he once slept, helping others navigate the maze of bureaucracy and prejudice. One evening, he sat on a rooftop overlooking the city's skyline ablaze with sunset hues. He closed his eyes and felt the cool breeze whisper through the cables of his old uniform's medals, a reminder of battles fought and a life reclaimed. In the gentle hush of that rooftop, Michael David Carter reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the betrayals, the fears, the improbable alliances, and the courtroom's fierce glare. He understood at last that justice is not a simple triumph of right over wrong, but a fragile tapestry woven from truth, mercy, and courage. And though shadows would always linger at the edges of every story, he knew that with a steadfast heart and a clear name, even the darkest corridors could be flooded with light. The courtroom had emptied, leaving only the soft echo of hastily pushed back chairs and the distant murmur of court staff gathering papers. Michael David Carter lingered by the defense table, letting the afternoon light pool around him. Every nerve in his body hummed with relief, but also with a strange emptiness now that the fight was over. Sarah Mitchell stood nearby, shoulders relaxed for the first time in days, and Detective Carla Benson gathered her belongings with a small, satisfied smile. Judge Eleanor Reynolds paused at the doorway, offering Michael a nod that carried both respect and something like pride. He returned it, the weight of her approval settling deep in his chest. When the last light winked off the polished floor behind her, Michael took a slow breath, as if inhaling all the lessons the trial had taught him. He held a small stack of envelopes in his hands. Letters from jurors who had thanked him for his honesty, notes from community members offering support, and one from Reverend Thomas Whitaker reminding him, "Every story of redemption lights the way for another." Inside the shelter's crowded common room, he set the envelopes on a folding table. Volunteers bustled around, serving coffee and warm breakfasts, the smell of fried eggs and toast mingling with that unmistakable aroma of possibility. At the end of a line stood Tommy Lawrence, leaning on his crutches, his 2 children clinging to his legs. When Tommy saw Michael, he grinned and lifted one of the envelopes. "Look," he said, winking. They wrote. His daughter, Mary, peeked up and asked shyly, "Is that for you, Mr. Carter?" Michael knelt, so he was eye level with her. "It's for all of us," he said, handing her a letter that glowed soft in her small hands. "Because we did this together." Mary's eyes lit up. Tommy tousled her hair and guided her and Jacob to the breakfast table. Michael watched them go, this simple scene anchoring him to a new purpose. The trial had delivered justice, but this was the real victory. Rebuilding trust, starting anew where it mattered most. That afternoon, Michael moved into a modest apartment provided by a local veterans program. The walls were bare, the floors uncarpeted, but the sunlight poured through the windows in broad swaths. He carried in a single box of belongings, a framed photograph of his daughter on her 5th birthday, his old service medals carefully polished, and the battered leather journal he'd kept during the long months of trial. He set the photograph on a small wooden shelf and hung his medals above it. As he fastened the final nail, he heard a soft knock at the door. It was Sarah, holding a steaming mug of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering the mug and stepping inside without waiting. The apartment was as sparse as she'd expected. Michael accepted the coffee and took a slow sip. The heat warmed his hands. "Thank you," he said, "for everything." She looked around, then at him. "It's yours now. Your space." Her green eyes flicked to the medals. "They belong here." He touched the ribbon on his bronze star with reverence. "They do. But more than that, this place, it's a reminder that I'm more than what happened to me." Sarah nodded, stepping closer. "So are you." They stood in companionable silence, 2 survivors of a battle fought not with guns but with words and wills. Then Sarah spoke again. "I started a case study on your trial. I want other veterans to benefit from what we learned about legal support and mental health protections." Michael smiled faintly. "You're unstoppable." She laughed softly. "Someone has to be." A month later, Michael returned to the shelter, not as a client, but as a counselor. His uniform now was a polo shirt with the shelter's logo and a name tag. Michael D. Carter, Veteran Advocate. He sat at a folding table with binders full of phone numbers for housing programs, legal aid contacts, and mental health clinics. A young man named Luis approached, eyes wary. "Are you the veteran who sued the DA?" Michael gestured to a chair. "That was me. But right now, I'm here to help. What's on your mind?" Luis shifted uncomfortably. "I'm scared. I've been living here for 6 months, but I'm not sure how to get out. They say I need 3 months of stable income and a permanent address. I don't have either." Michael leaned forward. "Let's start with small steps. You're working part-time at the warehouse, right? We'll document that. Then we'll call the housing coordinator. I'll go with you if you want. You're not alone in this." Luis exhaled, tension easing from his shoulders. "Okay." He sat down, and Michael opened his binder, another man setting a foot on the path toward dignity. That evening, Michael sat alone on the roof of his apartment building. The city lights stretched in a glittering tide below, punctuated by the neon of convenience stores and the soft glow of street lamps. He held his journal in his lap and traced the cover's worn leather with one finger. He thought of the trial. The betrayal by his attorney, Sarah's courageous confession, the revelation of corruption within the DA's office, Detective Benson's unwavering integrity, and the jury's final verdict. He remembered lying on a thin mattress, nameless, broken, clinging to the faint hope that his name still meant something. He remembered Judge Reynolds's steady voice, each decision balanced on the scales of fairness. He pondered the moral heart of his journey. Power, he realized, can be wielded to protect or to destroy. Truth can be buried, manipulated, or set free. And once free, it can ignite hope or bring ruin. But names, our names, carry a spark of identity, a sliver of light that no darkness can fully extinguish. When we speak someone's name with respect, we acknowledge their humanity and their story. Michael opened his journal and wrote, "Name is more than a label. It is a promise that we will remember who we are, even when the world tries to redefine us. Justice is not just a verdict in a courtroom. It is the daily work of reclaiming dignity for ourselves and for each other." He closed the journal, tucking it beside his medals on the shelf. The cool night air rattled the antennae above him, blending with distant traffic hum. Michael inhaled deeply, feeling the city's rhythms settle his heart. In the months that followed, the shelter's caseload shifted. Fewer veterans stayed long-term. More found housing, jobs, counseling. Michael continued his outreach, his own story becoming a beacon. He spoke at legal conferences about protecting clients from evidence tampering, collaborated with police departments on veteran-sensitive protocols, and even returned to the courthouse to mentor law students. One crisp morning, Michael attended a small ceremony at the courthouse steps. A plaque was unveiled, dedicating a conference room in Judge Reynolds's honor, the Eleanor Reynolds Justice Forum, to support pro bono veterans cases. Sarah stood beside him, holding Tommy's children. Detective Benson saluted as the ribbon was cut. Reverend Whitaker led a brief prayer, speaking of justice tempered with mercy. Michael looked around at the faces, friends, allies, fellow veterans, and felt the full circle of his journey. From a homeless veteran on trial to advocate for justice, he had navigated betrayal, fear, and prejudice to arrive at a place of purpose. He understood now that true resolution was not an end, but a beginning, the start of paying forward the compassion, integrity, and courage that had saved him. As the crowd dispersed, Michael lingered, touching the cool bronze of the new plaque. He smiled, thinking of the thousands of names it represented, names that mattered. In that moment, he felt the gentle pull of his daughter's laughter, the steady hand of faith, and the unwavering promise that no name, no story would be lost to the darkness again. And so, Michael David Carter walked down the courthouse steps into the bright morning, carrying his name proudly, ready to shine its light for anyone still trapped in shadow. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.